Yeah, we'll go ahead and get started since we've got our speaker here and most of the lunch is distributed. I want to thank everybody for their quick sign up. We're still trying to work through how we distribute the information, but it was clear to us that our original methods didn't work, and so we reverted to some old school get out and communicate. But we are so glad you're here. This will actually conclude the Bizzell lecture series for the spring. So as we begin preparing for next fall, if there's any content areas or speakers that would be of interest to you, let us know, because we really do this for you as a way to get exposure to alumni and friends of the school that are in the business of healthcare. And we want to bring the variety of different areas in the business of healthcare to you. Interestingly, I saw a piece of data today that graduates from UNC is number 2 school of pharmacy that puts individuals into fellowships, industry-based fellowships. Second only to Rutgers, which, as one might expect, that's a very large number, but I think it demonstrates exactly what the title of his talk is about. Is there's a hunger for non-traditional, and maybe actually probably soon that will be called traditional career paths for the pharmacist. So Steve Buckley is not only a graduate of the School of Pharmacy, but had a long career at GSK, really around pharmacovigilance. We didn't get a chance to talk about it, but he just came back from New Zealand. So all of my communication with him was when he was over there. So thanks for coming out, and we looking forward to this.
Now, can you guys hear me? Now, can you guys hear me? Okay. Thank you for that introduction, Stephen. And I'm not surprised to hear that the school puts out the second most numbers of graduates who go into fellowships. We'll talk about those in a little while. They're great things. If you have the opportunity to do one, do it. If you have the interest, definitely do it. Is it absolutely required? In my opinion, no, but we can talk about that a little bit more at the question and answer session. I want to tell you about how I got to where I was after I was in your shoes. Now, you can tell by the amount of gray hair that I have. It wasn't last week, but my experience is very recent, and the need for pharmacists in non-traditional career paths is definitely there, and it's something I urge you to explore. I really didn't do that when I was in the last couple of years of school. I didn't have the sense to do it. No one told me to do it. I was kind of a passive student, to be totally honest with you. And I just kind of fell into it by chance and by luck and timing and all those kind of things that come together. But it's something that the industry needs, are more pharmacists coming into that particular discipline. And it's something that this school definitely prepares you well for, okay? Again, I'm not going to tell you how old I am, but I was old enough to get a bachelor's degree from this school back when they still offered those. And then about 5 years after finishing, no, about 6 years finishing after finishing that, I got a PharmD. And in between then, I did a residency in hospital pharmacy. That was not really the kind of planned order in which I would thinking I would do this, and I wouldn't recommend it, but just again, it just kind of happened. I graduated with a bachelor's degree, and I did community pharmacy for a while, and then I went into hospital pharmacy at a hospital about 10 miles away. It starts with a D, UKE. a big tertiary care hospital, which was a great way to learn how medicine is practiced and how it's delivered and how pharmacy is practiced and delivered. It was real world. It was great. You pretty much saw everything there. It was a very busy place, tons of other pharmacists, a lot to do, a lot to learn. And that was great. And while I was there, I saw these people kind of poking through and coming through like a month at a time and rounding with the doctors and looking at people's charts and doing presentations and research projects. And I thought, wonder what that's all about. It turns out they were residents. And I kind of thought, well, I think I want to do that because it got you out of the pharmacy. It looked like people were still kind of learning. And when I finished school, I kind of always had the inkling that I would go back and do something afterwards, but I wasn't quite sure. So a good kind of holding pattern and a great way to advance your skills, get more knowledge, is to do a residency and or fellowship. So that's what I did. And it's kind of fate and kind of one of those things when you're in the middle of, you don't see it. But I worked at Duke and I interviewed there as a resident and as a resident applicant. And this is when you completed your residency forms on a piece of paper and you wrote it down, you put a stamp on it in the mail, remember that? And I interviewed other places, and at the very last minute, before I sealed that envelope, I put Duke. And that's where I ended up matching. And when I opened that letter, again, this is before the internet, I didn't know whether I had to laugh or to cry. But I met my wife there. It turned out to be a great thing. So I ended up doing a residency. Oops. Thank you. And during my last months of residency, I kind of thought, I really didn't know what I wanted to do yet either at that time. So I went back and got a PharmD. These were all kind of stalling tactics, kind of indecision, not knowing what I wanted to do when I grew up, all that kind of thing. And it all turned out okay. And I'm here to tell you, if you don't have like this concrete plan that you're going to do this and you're going to do this and that, that's okay, but kind of leave yourself open to options. And the job that you take after graduation is not the job you're probably going to have 10 years, who knows? So keep an open mind and kind of go with the flow. And one thing I'll have to say is that I did not have to worry about student loans or these big bills that you guys have. So it was kind of easier back then. So try not to let money dictate what you do too. So again, I did get some community hospital pharmacy experience before I took the board. You had to have so many hours that you set before the board. I think some of it was retail and some of it was hospital. So I did that. I got around to doing that and I took the board. And I did that very briefly before I went to hospital experience that I just told you about. This was back in the day. It was a tiny little pharmacy, none of these crazy Walgreens, all that kind of stuff where they do, I don't know, hundreds and hundreds of prescriptions a day. It was none of that. But again, I saw how pharmacy was practiced in, the real world and on the ground and people with prescription cards and, prior approval and all the kind of things that happen when you try to deliver medicine to people, hand it to them, patient package inserts, a lot of different things in that realm that ended up being applicable to what I did later on. So what I want to also impart upon you guys is that if you do clinical jobs after you get out of school for the first time, clinical experience will translate well into other non-traditional career paths, such as industry. I'll tell you a little bit more about that. The same thing with retail. If you have any experience with delivering medicines through a third-party payer system where you have to go through the hoops and understand everything you have to go through for that to happen, you will have an informed voice at the table when those kind of discussions come up in a career industry as well. So we have a lot of transferable skills and we know a lot about a lot of things. I kind of said this before. I got a lot of experience in a big hospital in a short amount of time. These are the services that they had at Duke. Now they have more bone marrow transplant. Who knows? But I just kind of did that for a couple of years, kind of figure out what that was all about and kind of figure out what I wanted to do afterwards. Most of what I was doing was dispensing, and especially at the end of my career when I was a third shift, overnight shift pharmacist, You were the only person in town, only game in town. And that was fine. You figure stuff out, but that kind of decision-making ability on the fly will help you later on when you're part of a larger team. So all transferable skills and knowledge sets, and the knowledge that you get here in school that you build upon in whatever job you take first is transferable. So this, you guys know what residencies are. I did one of these. I told you all about it. It was, a million years ago, but the principles still apply. That if you have the desire and the ability to do something like a residency and a fellowship, I would say certainly explore that. Okay. And if you know at this point you want to do something in infectious disease or cardiology or cancer care or something like that, pursue that as well. Because again, those specialized skills will be transferable. A little bit more about what I did once I got into the industry. And basically, I got in after I graduated from PharmD school here, and I got an entry-level position as a clinical research associate, working with part of a bigger team, shepherding a drug through the development system. Again, you weren't the sole pharmacist on the floor during the third shift in the hospital. You were part of a big team with a lot of other smart people to ask questions of and learn from. I'm not going to dwell on the detail of the slide, but if you work on clinical development in the industry, most likely you are going to work on drugs that fail. And I did that for about 7 years before I worked on the one new original entity that I ever worked on in 11 years in clinical research. The process is culled down over a period of years, and we spend hundreds of millions of dollars. But even when that pace goes kind of slowly, or if it's something real fast, something an accelerated approval or something like that, the principles and processes that you learn lend themselves to other therapeutic areas. And we as pharmacists, especially as a product of this school, know a lot of therapeutic areas, a lot of different things, a lot of things about drugs, kinetics, drug information, medical literature, therapeutics, pharmacology, et cetera, et cetera. The list goes on that a lot of other people around the table will not. Physicians have one skill set, nurses have another skill set. We have a different one that I would say is very much needed and in demand in the industry. And it is a good place to develop a career. I will never apologize for working for the industry. I feel like it is a good place to kind of serve the public health on a bigger scale than what you might do in a clinical practice. And what you do definitely has impact on the patient, especially if you work in something like drug safety, where you're kind of monitoring and looking for problems and communicating risks and things like that. I don't know how I'm doing on time. We can come back to these, or I can go through this real slow. You guys know the phases of drug development. Probably phase one, the first one, give it to healthy volunteers for the most part, less than 100 patients, and you advance patients with the disease, a couple hundred. Get larger exposure before you apply for approval, maybe a few thousand patients, as you can see over here. And then this is kind of where the action begins when the drug gets approved and people can use it for whatever condition they want to and not read the label a lot of times. Sometimes that's done, we look at that under formal studies. Other times it just happens with spontaneous reports. And that's, again, in terms of drug safety, where the fun really begins, because in clinical trials, the numbers are pretty slow. You get clean patients, you don't have any troublemakers. You exclude all kinds of con meds, any kind of systemic disease. You mostly want to have people with the disease, nothing else. That may not always be possible, but the safety population for a drug at approval is relatively limited in terms of its size and the types of patients that have been exposed to it, just kind of by definition. So keep that in mind. I'm kind of bouncing a little bit back and forth here. I apologize. So what'd you do when you got this entry-level job? You're a study monitor. You make sure that investigative sites are following the protocol and doing what they said they were going to do in terms of safety required monitoring and efficacy, informed consent, getting IRB approval, all the kind of logistics, as well as following patients for safety and efficacy. Early on, most commonly safety. So we made sure that people did all those things that they were supposed to do, and they documented it, and it was reproducible, and they had backup files and all this other kind of stuff. You made sure that they accounted for the drug, just kind of all the logistical things associated with giving someone an investigational drug, saying, here, go use it, and documenting and following up on the fact how they do it, okay? At the end of the day, when those studies finish, you're involved with a statistician, probably a physician, in writing study reports. And by virtue of the definition, if you work for a large company, you're probably going to do this in multiple therapeutic areas. But we as pharmacists can do that, right? Because we work in multiple therapeutic areas. That's kind of what we do. It's our thing. So that's kind of the groundwork experience you get in clinical research. I think I've answered all these questions, but you know, why do pharmacists need to work in drug development and drug safety? We know drugs. And we know how it's delivered. We know therapeutics. We know how medicine is delivered on the floor when we do our rotations. We see people in hospitals, clinics, et cetera, et cetera. And we kind of have an inside scoop on how the healthcare system works, you know, more than the average bear, I would say. I think the fact that most of you guys are here is because we're scientifically curious, right? And I think we probably do this better than other healthcare professionals. I'm biased. I hope you guys are too, but pharmacists are good at all these things. And this education that you get here in school will lend yourself to do this kind of thing as well. So, let's see, how am I doing? Not too bad. The majority of my experience in industry was in a discipline known as pharmacovigilance. And as you might be able to tell from, you know, putting word roots together, pharmaco, like pharmacology, and vigilant, looking for problems before they happen optimally, but that doesn't always kind of happen. And here's the definition of it, and I'm not going to read you, but you'll hear people say PV, pharmacovigilance, PVG, safety, drug safety, product safety. That is what I'm going to talk about for the next 15 minutes. And again, this was the most satisfying aspect of my career because as a pharmacist, I was very well trained to do it as a result of being in the school like you guys. I had no idea that this was what I was going to do when I was in pharmacy school. None. Showing my age a little bit again, but this is back in the day when they said, here, we have a job opportunity. And they put a piece of paper on something called a bulletin board, and a thumbtack. And I saw this job on a Friday afternoon, and I thought, oh, I read the description. It was everything I told you and everything that we are able to do. And I thought, I could do that. And I was kind of bored with what I was doing. I'd done that for 11 years. I kind of felt like I, you know, got a feel for what I was doing. I knew a thing or two. It was time to make a change. And I knew as a result of knowing other pharmacists in the industry, you could do multiple things within the same career. You can go work in regulatory affairs. You could do something in medical affairs. You could do in medical information, clinical development, pharmacovigilance. So here was one of the things I thought, I bet I could transition well to do this. And I did. It was kind of crazier than I ever thought because, again, I spent most of my time in clinical research and artificial environment controlled studies, clean populations, et cetera, et cetera. When you go into real world drug safety, you see all kinds of crazy stuff that you never dreamed of in drug development, like abuse potential, you know, especially if it's like a new crazy antidepressant or something that you really, you know, controlled substances, yes, but you know, things like that, suicidality. That whole kind of issue evolved over the past 20 years, but that's probably something we never would have thought of. And some of the classes that it's a labeled event for. What we try to do is look for trouble, communicate it via product labeling most frequently, also communicate it to senior management, unanticipated problems or anticipated problems. You know that people are going to start using a drug in kids because it's for seizures, even though you didn't get initial approval for kids. Look out and see what happens if you get adverse event words in kids. And again, try to communicate it most commonly through labeling and regular updates to regulatory authorities in what are called periodic reports. You have to do them every 3 months for the first 4 years, and every 6 months, every 5 years, et cetera, et cetera. You kind of look for things that you might have expected, but you didn't see yet, or kind of expect the unexpected. And look for rare adverse events. That is one of the biggest jobs of pharmacovigilance. You know, blood dyscrasias that might happen in 1 in 5 million people, but they do happen. But you have a drug that, you know, is a household name. You have to be able to detect for those and work with a number of different tools to do that. And I'll talk a little bit about those. I talked about this already. This is one of the main limitations of clinical trial data. One of the things that we as pharmacists in drug safety also do is make sure that we report this information to the people that need to get it, like clinical investigators who are might still be doing studies with your drug, to your doctor letters, regulatory authorities, and making sure that the data are in the format that is acceptable to regulatory authorities, reported electronically, uploaded to their server, et cetera, et cetera. That's required on a periodic basis, depending upon the age of your drug and where it's marketed. And there's also a time at which you look for safety signals, things that are typically drug related that you haven't seen yet, rare events, all those things I talked about. And it's something that we as pharmacists do very, very well. Where do we get data from? You know, I've talked a lot about clinical trials, and that is just but one source of safety data that come in from everywhere. We get them from regulatory authorities in the US, most commonly the FDA. If someone reports something to them, they will say, hey, you at company here, we've heard about this adverse event. You look at it too, and they might say, tell us why this is not in your product labeling, or if you have any plans to do that, or just keep an eye on it and communicate to us on this drug event pair every 6 months until we tell you not to. We get a lot of reports from healthcare professionals, not enough, and they're not as well documented as you want. If you ever complete an adverse event report, I will thank you in advance to be complete and thorough and write sentences where you have the opportunity to do that, not tweets or anything like that. We do get safety information from social media. If it is a social media site that a company supports in any way. To my knowledge, we don't go trawling looking for trouble on Facebook. It's like breaking into jail. But we do monitor what we're responsible for. There's a lot of great information that comes from medical journals. Those become part of a safety database where you look for these signals that I talked about, unexpected findings, et cetera, et cetera. And you get a lot just from call centers where people just want to maybe complain, get their money back. And at the end of the call, they said, oh, you know, I took your drug, or my brother-in-law took your drug and he had a heart attack. You can't dismiss that because it's a one-liner said to you by someone who was hanging up when they had another intent to call you. You have to database that. Look at that along with the reports from regulatory authorities, the literature, clinical trials, post-marketing trials, et cetera, et cetera. Sometimes the amount of this information is vast. You have to assimilate it and come to a conclusion about it and communicate that conclusion. That's the essence of what is done in product safety on a periodic basis when you are looking for safety signals. While you're doing that, you're also looking at the data as they come in and say, okay, we need to report this quickly. This one we can put in a periodic report. This one we need to alert these people. So it's kind of no 2 days are ever the same. It's really sometimes hard to predict the future, like when a brand new drug gets approved. Sometimes you can have uses that you did not expect, or the degree of which you did not expect, and have to deal with phone calls and letters and things like that. I've left out one other source of safety reports. We get a lot of cases from attorneys. This drug hurt this person, et cetera, et cetera. And a lot of times it is just boxes and boxes and boxes and boxes of paper that we have to go through, triage it, and then make sure any of this is new information that we need to kind of expedite, report it, and then put it in the database, and then trying to figure out what's going on with this legal situation. So I hope I've given you an idea of what pharmacists can do in drug safety. I can't remember what the rest of my slides say. What happens with what we do? When we assess the safety information and look problems, we put it in labeling. You guys know what labeling is. If you turn on the TV news between 5 and 7, all you see is pharmaceutical advertising and labeling. A lot of what we do has bearing upon that. How do you communicate these risks? How prominent do they have to be based on the indication? We also send a good number of your healthcare professional letters when we find something new that you need to know about, maybe amend the way you prescribe the drug, stop using the drug, whatever the case may be. Certainly have a voice at the table for that. The same to direct-to-consumer advertising. Does this product need to be withdrawn? Does it need to be restricted? Does it need further labeling? Does it need a contraindication? All those kind of things. You will have the data, and we'll be at the table making these decisions, along with higher management and physicians and things like that. And is anything that we're seeing out here in the marketplace affect what we're doing in clinical development? Do we need to stop trials in asthmatics because we're seeing a safety signal in that population? Those kind of things. Sometimes you expect those kind of questions, sometimes you don't. I think drug safety and pharmacovigilance is the best place for all you people in this room. We need more pharmacists to do it. How many times do I need to say that? But there are other things that you can do as well, and I touched on those a little bit. Medical information pharmacists own that discipline within the industry. It's because we're taught to evaluate the literature and do that on a constant basis and come up with recommendations. Or what do you think about the the same thing with clinical pharmacology. If you're into kinetics and you want to study that branch of pharmacy and pharmacy school, I would definitely recommend you do that. Oops, there are numerous opportunities to do that. It doesn't matter. Pick one. I was talking about clinical pharmacology, clinical kinetics. Pharmacists run that too, as we should. And that is also a very impactful, important, critical part of drug development that we own. I am sorry, let's see. Here we go. I think I just said this, but this is very early on clinical development, dose range finding studies, monitoring kinetics and safety, all the things that are done in early phase that pharmacists keep a close eye on from a disposition point of view. We own this. And if you have an interest and an ability in this particular discipline, go for it. I'm just kind of wrapping up with, let's see. Yeah, there are other opportunities too. I forgot this one. Pharmacists run the kind of in-industry pharmacy that dispenses all the investigational product around the world. Not a small task, keeping up with regulations and labeling and accountability, et cetera, et cetera. Pretty much all pharmacists. That might foray into a position in regulatory affairs, as would working in clinical. There are pharmacists who go into the commercial aspect of the industry as well. The more organized type, project management. I applied for a job in project management. I'm really not sure why. It sounded kind of good, and maybe you got to boss people around. And you have to be organized to do that. I wasn't particularly organized. And, at the time I thought, oh man, I didn't get that job. It's probably a great thing. I did not end up in project management. It would have been a big mess. People management. No amount of experience in these chairs can prepare you for that, though. And if there was any way to improve somehow, how you deal with people once you get out of here, and all your friends and everyone's in the same boat, and we're all studying and brainiacs and the best school in the country, and so you're kind of this little bit artificial environment. You get real people in the mix when you go out to work, and sometimes you have to manage them, and that's not always fun. There are great people, and then there are not so great people, and the best I can tell, there's no box anywhere that says, are you crazy a little bit, or are you stupid, or are you lazy, or people like that get in everywhere, and nothing prepares you for that. But you'll learn it on the job, and I think kind of an extension of your smarts being in this school, you're going to pick up on people and have to do that pretty quickly. I wish there was a better way to prepare people for that while you're in school, but you have enough on your plate and you'll figure it out. So, should I do a residency and fellowship? If you can, if you want to. If you don't know what to do, and you can if you want to. Yeah, go ahead and do it. I know that's easy for me to say, having did it, a million years ago, but I would venture to say that any additional skill and experience that you will get of any more specialized training is gonna serve you well. There's just no two ways about that. Again, I don't know what they pay nowadays, and you have loans and things like that. If you can, if you want to, if you're in a position to do it, you have the interest, do it. Do you have to? No, you really don't. I don't think. I kind of get the question, how do I get, industry experience when I don't have any experience, and I want people with experience before they hire anyone, chicken and egg, all that. And that's a fair question. There are ways in, like at places called CROs, that they'll see a PharmD, and you guys are in a very good position. I hope you know that. You're from the best school in the country. When you're interviewing, brag about that a little bit. If you don't have a whole lot of professional experience yet, someone says, why should I hire you? You said, well, I went to the best school in the country. I got in there, I graduated, here I am. You need to start doing that within reason. People see a PharmD, and they know, a lot of smart people know the skills that we have. And we work hard, and we're smart and personable, and we get along with everybody. A CRO will hire you. A call center for a big pharma company might hire you. A small startup might hire you. What if I don't know? You'll know when you know, I think. If you don't know now, that's okay. You guys are so young. You'll figure it out. Just take chances, be curious, be open-minded. Think about things, I never thought about doing that. Does it matter when you went to school? Do you want school here? Yes, of course it did. You guys are here? Yes. Brag about the fact you went to the school and you got in. There is no way I would get into the school nowadays. That's just a fact. You guys did. Talked a little about people, money. Try not to let money dictate what you do, the next immediate thing. That will happen as your career develops, I promise. Be a good writer, be the best writer that you can. You will be communicating with people via email, maybe other things like that. I'm not talking about texting. No. Be a good writer, be the best writer you can be always. Okay? And either got it or don't, common sense. We have plenty of time for questions. I don't know if that was anything what you guys expected, but that's what I have.
Questions for Dr. Buckley?
Throw me a bone, come on.
What does a day-to-day look like for you? Like, what are your
daily tasks? Like, are you in meetings a lot of the day? Who are you
Um,
talking to?
right now, I am not currently working by choice, but my last job, more than I would want was meetings, but it was dealing with people and people asking me what to do, what should I do. Um, can I talk to you about this? Wanting some amount of your time. Um, I also spend a lot of time like looking at ways to improve the things that we do. If you're a part of a large organization, I think, they're always looking at how to do things better, more efficiently. So look at that kind of stuff. I might get pulled into, someone who's looking to make a label change for a product and they want to put something, pretty significant in, and they have the documentation to do that. What are the questions going to be? No 2 days are ever the same. Um, you might be looking at, and one of the things, I'm so glad you asked this question. One of the things that I still do on a frequent basis um, was look at cases as they came in, adverse event information as it comes in. And like I said, we get it from everywhere. We get it from the internet. We get it from crazy people. We get it from smart people. We get it from the literature, everywhere. And it all comes in on this interface. You got to figure out like how to do this too, which I did. That was not a small task though. And then figure out, is this something we need to follow up on, or is it something we don't need to worry about? And do it like, and a lot of times you can tell because it's poorly documented that you can't take any action. But sometimes we'll have just enough information we think, oh, I don't know, and kind of kind of ask the right questions, make sure follow-up is obtained. So you're looking at real-world clinical data, and you can look at patients' labs as you do this. It was in oncology, and how severe was their neutropenia, and conversations that you guys will have in whatever type of position you end up, but things that we talk about all the time. So a little patient information coming from clinical trials, maybe some spontaneous reports, people management, process management. I don't remember what else, stuff like that. But I would say it's never boring. It's always challenging. I never have ever felt like I got this all figured out, and this is easy, and it kind of keeps you on your toes and keeps you a little young, and with it. So yeah.
So, with all of the new technology that's emerging in healthcare, are there any hard skills that you would recommend students try and teach themselves to prepare for non-traditional roles?
That's a good question. Again, I'm so glad you're thinking of all the things I forgot. What they are, exact products or no. However, I will say, acquaint yourself with large healthcare databases, regulatory agencies. The EMA has a pretty slick website where kind of human safety and clinical information is held. You can learn to search that and report it pretty well, for, just kind of play with it and things like that. Any kind of healthcare claims data, there are some public, claims databases that you can kind of manipulate. Anything looking at large amounts of healthcare data from disparate sources, or maybe they're specialized. Be able to access information and keep your IT skills up. How generic is that? But know your way around the regulatory agency database. I would say what they're looking at, what are kind of the adverse events of concern right now, and they go in kind of waves, and you'll see it's PML or it's press, or it used to be suicide, and how these things kind of evolve. And this week I just saw an article about an FDA advisory committee review of the iPledge program for isotretinoin. That thing is almost as old as me. So drug safety issues are followed for long periods of time as well. And there's always a safety person associated with a product in any given company, because you have to do safety reporting no matter what. The regulatory person's gone, this one's gone, clinical people, no one supports it anymore. There will be a safety person. And it takes long amounts of time to figure out, are the interventions that we're implementing effective? Like iPledge, it used to be you give someone a sticker and put it on the prescription, said, here, I told them not to get pregnant. Well, no, it didn't. It proved you had stickers before you gave the prescription to somebody. So those type of discussions are still going on, and pharmacists are around the table making. So I hope that answered your question. Maybe. Okay. One more. Okay. Yeah. Yes.
So since you've worked in clinical and like industry, what would you say is like pros and cons to each? Or were there things that you didn't like about one that you like in the other?
Clinical?
Yeah, didn't you do like a clinical residency as well?
Yeah, that seems like such a long time ago. The thing I enjoyed about that, and I think the great thing about anyone who does them, is you do 30 days. 30 days isn't that long to do these rotations. Before you kind of figure it out, or you figure out you hate it, it's over. That was great. You do 12 of those, and you don't have to get really attached to anything, but you figure out what it is that interests you. In terms of there's the lifestyle that you kind of have to lead if you work clinical night shifts. When I worked as a hospital pharmacist, it was crazy, 3 to 11, 11 to 7. That whole part I did not miss one bit. That's where I learned a lot. So it's just kind of a totally different beast. For the most part, I worked 8 to 5, and then probably a couple of hours at night on the week, during the week, through Thursday, and then maybe some on Sunday. Sometimes more than that, sometimes less than that. It's just a matter of priorities and what kind of lifestyle your position dictates for you. That answer your question? Okay. But I thought I'm going to go a little further. I thought you were talking about clinical development and then working in drug safety. Clinical development, again, was great, a great place to learn, large teams of people. Things happen kind of slow. So, kind of gets through your thick head. That's kind of a blessing and a curse. You're looking at timelines where, you expect approval or submission in 2030. They become kind of abstract thoughts and things, you try to do things as fast as you can. Whereas if you work especially in the post-marketing side of drug safety, it's almost like instant today. You look at the cases you got today and see if you have any problems. It's more kind of on the ground every day, up to the minute, whatever you want to say. And there's good things about both.
Let me build off her question a little bit.
Yeah.
So do you think it's better if you want to end up in the industry to start out through the hospital or patient care setting versus going straight out of their PharmD into a fellowship into the job?
I mean, if you can go straight into it, I think that's becoming harder and harder without fellowship experience, although I'm not sure of that. It's always a good thing to get additional clinical experience. It will serve you well no matter what you do. You might apply it in a different way, but you will have had that and you will have seen it. And you can't, it's kind of like, you can't unsee things, but you will definitely apply it later on. It just might be in a different setting. Instead of, patients in the clinic or patients in the hospital or patients on the line listing in a chart, it might be columns of treatment versus placebo versus active comparator. Those kind of broad level decisions are much different than you might make on the ground, but the thought process and the background is kind of the same. Make sense? Is this making sense to you guys? You can shake your heads. You guys look so serious.
Can I ask a follow-up to that? So because something that I've been hearing more and more often from a lot of folks who are PharmD background and work in industry is that clinical serves you really good before going into industry.
Absolutely.
When comparing clinical to fellowship. But then my question is, if
They're
you
both going to serve. I don't want to say serve better
than the other.
serve well.
Okay. And then let's say you do go down the clinical route, right? In clinical, let's say you do residency, you have to pick a specific area of concentration. In clinic, like it can be like internal med or oncology. So let's say you're done with your residency and you've had this like specialty in that one area. When going into industry, do you have to stick to that, or can you broaden your horizon?
Oh, no, should never let your lack of experience stop you from applying for a job. I thoroughly believe that. Let's say you did a residency in nephrology, okay? And then you do your homework and you think, hey, there's this, I want to go into industry. There's this company identified through my little homework on the internet that has a drug for lupus nephritis in development. Maybe they want to hire, someone like me who just finished that residency. That will certainly be attractive to anyone in that position. And things like that happen all the time. At the same time, someone will say, look, they just finished something in nephrology, but this is in cardiovascular medicine or something related. They'll see the skill set and the training, I think, much less than the actual specific area of study in a lot of ways. It's kind of, is this person intellectually curious? Oh, look, yeah, they did. They are. They did a fellowship. They didn't have to do that. Or they did a residency. They didn't have to do that. Those kind of things speak for you more than, I figured out if 0.1 milligram per deciliter was significant in the patient population that I study, something like that. They're both good, but that makes sense? Yep.
One of my observations that I've seen in terms of that question is that those who do a residency and have clinical experience many times enter through the medical science liaison route.
Yep.
Whereas pharmacovigilance, they probably are coming out of the fellowship or more of the expansive activities within the industry. When you don't have all that experience, you're more open to try different things. Whereas if you have all that clinical experience, more than likely you're going in sort of that educational route.
I'm so glad you said that. I mentioned medical information, but I did not mention the medical science liaison, which is kind of a hybrid from the development side of an organization that can speak to people about the ongoing research that's being conducted by a sponsor. That is an excellent way to get into the industry as well. It can be kind of, you're an ambassador, a politician, a conduit of scientific information. I was much more nerdy and didn't want to, give me some information on a paper and I'll write it up and give you the answer. But that is a great way, especially, again, using the example, you do residency and you specialize in nephrology. Become an MSL for the latest, nephroprotective agent in dialysis or something like that. That's how those things happen.
So in your introduction to Bizzell lecture series, it says that you've started your own independent consultancy work. What was the transition like going from working for a large company to getting to do your own independent activities?
That is a good question, man. Some of it was so terrifying because I just lived in fear of this, IT failure where I couldn't, some IT thing where if you're in a big company, hey, how do you fix this? What button do you push? And some of that was significant because I was working on a regulatory report, something that had to be done. It was for a very small company where I actually kind of put it together by hand versus producing it out of a database, say. But I had to put it into their database and make sure it was just so. They were kind of picky about it. And so those having the lack of infrastructure support was huge. But at the same time, this organization had never, ever really contracted out what I had to do for them. So they didn't ask any questions. They let me do what I needed to do. They were just kind of persnickety about their IT system. So it's all manageable, but you learn pretty quick. And another time the guy said, oh man, I want you to take that information, put it in a zip file, and then like all this other stuff. And I'd never done this before. You know, someone else had helped me do that if I ever was in a position to do that kind of thing. So there's definite pluses and minuses. But the most important thing I can tell you is that when you have this skill set, people will find you if they have a need for someone to do it for them. And right now I dip in and out every 6 months or so, and that's fine. Well, thanks for your attention, you guys.
Yeah, thank you very much, Dr. Buckley.
Oh, Steve Buckley is my name. Thanks. I always think you're talking about my dad. That's when people come up. Can I get your name? Yeah.
Nice job.
Thanks, man. I never know what's going to come out.